I had never seen Beetlejuice before, so I was very excited a couple months ago when I sat down to watch the classic film for the very first time. And though I'd never seen the movie, I knew who Beetlejuice was.
I'm the ghost with the most, babe.
Or so I thought. People remember Beetlejuice as this wacky goofball who sticks out his tongue at authority. They remember the movie as satirical, a crazy blend of funny pop culture references. And when I asked Twitter, pretty universally, you guys loved it. So boy, was I excited to see...
Babs.
Oh.
Not so fast, brown boy. We're gonna have some laughs.
Wow.
It makes me want to kiss you guys. Come on, come on, give me one. Come on, come on.
Huh. Beetlejuice was not funny?
That is why I won't do 2 shows a night anymore, babe.
His character was creepy?
We come for your daughter, Chuck.
Who I thought Beetlejuice was from the way that people talked about him versus who he actually was in the movie just like blew my fucking mind. Warning, if you really like Tim Burton, that's okay. But if you really like Tim Burton, this analysis may hurt your feelings. The premise of a couple dying together and having to learn to cope with the afterlife is really fresh and cool. And they're fairly likable characters, despite their blandness. But anytime Beetlejuice shows up, it just gets meh. He's like the annoying guy at a party who says something sexist or gross for attention, and then when people unfollow him on Twitter, he goes, "What? It's just a joke."
Excuse me? What?
If your titular character is the worst part of your movie, why do people still love it? People call Beetlejuice the work of an auteur.
It's a Tim Burton movie. Enough said. It's an artistic vision that could only come from him. It's an auteur movie.
Tim Burton is not just a director, he's an artist. He even had an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art, and they referred to him as an
auteur
in their booklet. Look, he drew a satirical illustration of former President Ronald Reagan. Oh boy, I'm sure I'll never find a way to tie Ronald Reagan back at the end of this video. So, asking myself why people remembered Beetlejuice so fondly, I thought maybe I'd find some answers by watching more Tim Burton movies. So let's go looking for meaning in Tim Burton's movies.
Enjoy.
The more I watched, the more I noticed a lot of themes that seem to contradict this idea that Burton's work is subversive. Burton actually seems to find comfort in the kind of suburban lifestyle that critics claim he's rebelling against, that he feels alienated from. Burton said he loved the script for Ed Wood because I live near a cemetery near the Burbank airport, and there was a reference in the movie to the Burbank airport and cemetery. It was very close to me because it took place in houses that were like the houses I lived in. Okay, so he's not critical of cookie-cutter architecture or ideology. He finds it familiar and comforting. Ed Wood was a pioneering LGBT filmmaker and fascinating character. That's what made him radical and memorable. But instead of identifying or empathizing with any of that boring old stuff, Burton fixates on Ed Wood's house. Even in Beetlejuice, we don't get the happy ending until the German expressionist-influenced nightmare is returned to a good old-fashioned normal. We see a similar thread in Edward Scissorhands. There's a huge focus on houses, but again, not in a satirical sense. They're all colorful in a way that's eccentric or heightened, but never critiqued. And it's not satire unless you use it to say something. Just heightening isn't enough. What does the visual grammar in Edward Scissorhands say to us? The suburbs are so nice! Look at Edward's face when he enters an artificial, sterile suburban home for the first time. Plus, everyone initially accepts Edward, despite him being different.
Well, you intend to show your guest hospitality by introducing him to your friends, don't you?
I'll bring coleslaw.
I'll bring chips.
Look how open-minded all these folks are. There is that one weird religious lady, but she doesn't really have an effect on the story. Instead, the central antagonist ends up being the sexually liberated housewife. And the main confrontation emerges from the fact that Edward is a passive character who, in uncomfortable situations, just shambles away.
Edward, you come back here! You can't do that!
And when the townspeople finally turn on him, in the most peaceful mob of all time, it's the sexy housewife who's centered in the frame. Religious crazy lady is just there off to the side. So Burton, in his satire criticizing suburban life, points to female sexuality and big old boobies as the most dangerous aspect of that life. there's the suburbs, which are nice and fine, and then there's this mansion up on a hill removed over there by itself. And in the end, the solution is to segregate the weirdo from society, which is exactly how the movie started. Oh, except it snows now. An entirely cosmetic difference. Oh, just by the way, Winona Ryder's character wraps up the movie by saying that she doesn't want Edward to see her because she's old and wrinkly.
I'm an old woman now. I would rather him remember me the way I was.
Winona, he has scissors for hands and scars all over his face. I mean, Burton, the one thing that you could have gotten right was don't judge people by their appearance, but I guess that doesn't count for girls. It just counts. It was right there, Burton, just right there. I don't want you to date me because I grew up and stuff. Get away, you freak! But it's not just houses, boobies, and wrinkles that reinforce the status quo in Edward Scissorhands. It's also the depiction of police. You'd think they'd end up being mean to Edward the outsider, or at least kinda hard on him. But nope, they're sweeter than Andy Griffith.
Listen, it could keep me up all night worrying about you. You watch yourself here.
The cop even protects Edward at the end after he cuts up Kevin. For someone with a reputation for using German expressionism and other outsidery, subculture-y, anti-authority genres, this movie sure loves authority figures. But this is a key aspect of Burton's work, recycling old, formerly rebellious imagery and co-opting it for exploitation in mainstream cinema. It's called recuperation. That's when politically radical ideas and images are commodified and as a result become innocuous or more socially conventional. There are many scenes with obvious German expressionist influences. However, these scenes aren't scary. They don't fill us with a sense of dread or foreboding the way that German expressionism does. So you take the mechanical, inhuman nature of a German expressionist industrial landscape, but instead of crushing the character's humanity, it produces heart-shaped cookies. There's a weird thread that consistently runs through Burton's movies where mad scientists make things like cookies and candy. Authority figures making treats for children. This trend of superficially referencing things purely for entertainment value means we get more and more mainstream films that don't seem to say anything other than, hey, look at this reference. And that reference. Yeah, this is also a reference, and that reference is actually, oh my god, is that Ronald Reagan? Watching and rewatching more and more Burton films, I started to think of his movies as just popcorn films, or like candy. Yummy, tasty, but ultimately kind of meaningless. And then, watching Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I saw this scene.
Why is everything here completely pointless? Candy doesn't have to have a point. That's why it's candy.
I hate to break it to Charlie, but no matter how hard an artist or entertainer tries to claim their work isn't political, it simply means that they're ignorant about the politics it perpetuates, they're in denial about the politics it perpetuates, or ugh. And his version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the perfect example of how Burton coats a gooey, society-reinforcing message inside a hard, sugary shell, which he swears is just candy. We're supposed to like Willy Wonka because he's a weird man-child, but he's actually a slave labor exploiting corporate overlord. And listen to Grandpa Bucket's story about getting laid off.
One day, without warning, Mr. Wonka told every single one of his workers to go home. He announced that he was closing his chocolate factory forever. I'd give anything in the world just to go in one more time.
Oh, I know, any sane person would say, I want my job back and I want to smash the capitalist who laid me off for no good reason, seize the means of production, and make more ethical candy without slave labor.
I'd give anything in the world just to go in one more time and see what's become of that amazing factory.
Oh, I'm sorry, you want a factory tour? Here you go. It's the beginning of Act 2 and your arc is over. I don't want to sound like I think Burton is a bad director. He's actually an incredibly talented director. One of a director's most important jobs is to make you suspend your disbelief so you don't question the reality of the narrative while you're in the theater. And Burton excels at that. Through a combination of fast-paced editing, comedic timing, and flashy special effects, he distracts us so we don't even think, wait, weren't they afraid of those sandworms earlier? Wait, how did she tame it? But while he enchants us with his otherworldly stories, he's also enchanting himself. He pulls lots of progressive, countercultural, and radical references, but he cobbles them together in a way that's ultimately mainstream, corporate, and safe. Maybe in 1988, a movie like Beetlejuice was more noticeably out there. Maybe it meant something to you. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying you shouldn't enjoy it or shouldn't look back fondly on it. The thing is, we can enjoy movies while looking at them with a critical eye. But I've got to ask, are there any progressive characters or voices in Tim Burton's movies? Yep. Harry Belafonte. Yes, Harry Belafonte, the Jamaican-American singer behind the songs on the Beetlejuice soundtrack, was heavily involved in the civil rights movement, was a confidant of Martin Luther King Jr., and even got blacklisted during the McCarthy era. Noah Berlatsky comments on the use of Belafonte's music in Beetlejuice, pointing out that it's virtually the only dialogue by a black person in the entire film. Even for the 1980s, Beetlejuice is shockingly white. The Maitland's Parlor trick is essentially a blackface lip sync, grabbing a bit of that ultra blackness without the inconvenience of actually putting speaking black people on screen. But again, Burton isn't commenting on white America co-opting music made by people of color for their mere entertainment. He's recuperating music from his childhood and whitewashing it. If you watch this movie as a kid, you don't know all that socio-political context. You just know it's a fun, magical bit. Working in a banana republic sounds great. Let's look at what Burton told Bustle back in 2016. I remember back when I was a child watching The Brady Bunch, and they started to get all politically correct, like, okay, let's have an Asian child and a black. I used to get more offended by that than just, I grew up watching blaxploitation movies, right? And I said, that's great. I didn't go, okay, there should be more white people in these movies. Reading that quote, I can feel Burton going, oh wait, I shouldn't be saying this, stopping himself and then saying something else even dumber. But yes, Burton not only sentimentalizes toys and movies, he also sentimentalizes, I think there's a word for it. Yikes. And the thing about sentimentality is, it also distorts memory. Burton sounds like he's saying there were no white people in blaxploitation movies, which you would think is true if you've never seen a blaxploitation movie. Is Beetlejuice a horribly racist movie? Does Tim Burton strip cultural references of their meaning, recycle them as a larger part of the studio system, which has a legacy of racism, appropriation, and erasure? Yeah. So it was the 80s. Everyone was on coke and we had a fakey Hollywood celebrity cowboy president. No one knew any better, right? Right? Except for John Waters, who directed
Hairspray,
which came out a month before Beetlejuice. And what does Hairspray think of white people who appropriate Harry Belafonte music, dress in black, and call themselves artists? Day-o, day-o, daylight's a-comin' and you wanna go home. Can you believe I just happened to find a scene from the same year making fun of white people singing Harry Belafonte music? Weird, huh? In addition to Waters, David Lynch is another director from that era whose work is an interesting contrast to Burton's. Lynch, in his 1986 classic Blue Velvet, incorporates visual motifs from film noir. In the opening scene, we even see the main character's mother watching a film noir movie. Lynch doesn't shy away from acknowledging his inspiration for the movie within the movie itself. Blue Velvet is a neo-noir, building on the tropes and conventions of classic noir films, which built on German Expressionism. Lynch's use of noir, juxtaposed against colorful, classic Americana imagery, emphasizes the hypocrisy of American society, the duality of his characters, and the facade of the American dream. Lynch is engaging in a dialogue with the films that came before his. His movies actually say something and exist as a larger conversation between art, artist, and audience. And whatever you or I may argue about whose work is more artistic and meaningful, no one can deny that Burton's method is the more commercially successful of the two. I can't help but think it's because audiences are more receptive to the visual aspects of German Expressionism when they're presented without all those icky feelings of angst. And there's one more director I think it's worth comparing to Burton. One whose work Burton even explored within his own films, at least superficially. Ed Wood was a real person. We have actual footage of him acting in his own movies. Here's a scene from Glenn or Glenda, one of the movies that Burton explores in the biopic.
I thought I could stop wearing these things. I tried, honestly, I tried. I haven't had a stitch of them on for nearly 2 weeks until tonight. Then I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to put the moniker out of my mind. I'm afraid I'll lose her. I don't want that to happen because I really love her.
Ed Wood may not have been a great actor, but the scene is heart-wrenching and honest. It's an actual person who wore women's clothing in public, in an era when that was even more dangerous than it is now, pouring their heart out about the inner turmoil caused by the tension between society's expectations and who he is as an actual outsider. Does Burton's movie capture this outsiderness? Nope. Depp's performance feels like a cartoon. And that's because Burton and Depp didn't base the portrayal on the real Ed Wood. Johnny Depp recounted, "Tim would say things like, Andy Hardy, so I saw some Andy Hardy stuff. I had a couple of other things that spiced it up a bit. I came to him and I said, listen Andy Hardy, but look, Ronald Reagan." And Tim went, "Wizard of Oz or Casey Kasem? Yeah, you know, we just boiled up the stew and we shot it." Here's Ed Wood again.
"To change one's sex, that's a pretty drastic step to take.
If it's the only way, I'm for it."
And here's Andy Hardy.
I'm getting dizzy. Oh, maybe Cupid is after me. Maybe love has found Andy Hardy.
So instead of basing their depiction of Ed Wood on actual footage of Ed Wood that they definitely had access to, they chose to base him on a cartoonish character from the 1940s and a Republican president who personifies violence against trans people. Not only did they portray Ed Wood as a caricature, but also the movie ends on a fairly happy note.
This is the one I'll be remembered for.
The real Ed Wood's life did not end on a happy note. He died penniless and drunk. His wife Kathy described the look on his face when she saw his body. It looked like he'd seen hell. Centering your subject's tragic life around a movie premiere just because you like movies is pretty messed up. Just like Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood simply moves throughout the movie, seemingly undaunted by the challenges life sets in front of him. In the hands of another director, this may have been a testament to Ed Wood's passion and drive, but it's more like he's just clueless about what he's up against, or what the world expects of him. Imogen Binney, in her podcast Imogen Watches Classic Films, describes the end of the movie where Ed Wood is frustrated with the Christians who financed Plan 9 from outer space because they keep suggesting changes to his film.
It is blasphemy. What are you talking about? It's the premise of the movie.
Ed retreats to his dressing room and then comes out in women's clothes and is oblivious to the fact that these Baptists or whatever are going to be upset about that. It's basically the climax of the film, and what we get is that Ed Wood doesn't know fucking shit about what people think about his cross-dressing because he's a stupid idiot.
I can't take it!
Depp's portrayal is less a person trying to live as their true self in a conformist society, and more of a smiling ninny. Ed Wood, the notoriously bad director, managed to tackle the subject of his own cross-dressing with more dignity than the
auteur,
Tim Burton. Her analysis of Ed Wood got me thinking about which character I identify with. And out of all his characters, it'd probably be Lydia, right? Here's what Larry Wilson, one of the writers of Beetlejuice, says about their intended audience.
There was a band, there's still a band, The Cure. I had gone to see them at the Rose Bowl. Huge concert, maybe 50,000 people. Nice. And it felt to me like it was 50,000 teenage girls in black. and the Winona Ryder character, Lydia, came out of that. And I always thought that's who the audience for this movie is.
So he saw some girls at a Cure concert, assumed he understood why they were wearing black, and just went to town.
I myself am strange and unusual.
I struggle with depression, and Lydia's portrayal of depression is honestly just kind of insulting. I mean, her suicide note is not meant to be taken seriously. How could it? The writers didn't give her a deep enough emotional life to introduce the threat of her character killing herself. It's just meant to be a joke. Her depression is neither explored or explained. It's shown as a problem, one that can be solved by external pressure. In the end, it's magically erased by attending a Catholic school and getting a new mommy and daddy. Listen, I got my depression at a Catholic school. I promise you, it's not a good solution. The movie even mocks people with suicidal thoughts.
You know what they say about people who commit suicide? In the afterlife, they become civil servants.
You know, I wonder what Tim Burton would say to this criticism. Oh, you know what? I don't have to wonder, because I know. It's right here.
Candy doesn't have to have a point.
That also happens to be the moment when Wonka decides to hand his factory over to Charlie. Because he realizes that in place of Charlie's soul, there's an empty void. You know, maybe that's why Charlie's last name is Bucket. Because he's hollow, devoid of human emotion, hell-bent on endless consumption. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a rare example where Burton chooses not to strip a work of its original meaning. Just look at this clip from the original Willy Wonka.
But I am different. I want it more than any of them.
The other kids get kicked out because they merely understand greed in concrete material terms. Charlie wins because his greed is pure. Greed is his ideology. Eat the candy. Keep eating candy because nothing matters. Fill your soul with candy, you shell of a human. But there is a tension in Burton's work. On one hand, there's his desire to prove that his work doesn't need to have meaning. And on the other is his desire for people to view his work as art that does have meaning. Burton stuck this quotation at the beginning of Big Eyes, his biopic about Margaret Keane, a painter from the 1960s. I think what Keane has done is just terrific. It has to be good. If it were bad, so many people wouldn't like it. Hey, Tim, are you okay? Like, you don't have to, you know, justify your work like this in front of a movie about other people. But I guess you did, so that also says a lot about you. But back to the point. The reason why I started working on this video. People love Beetlejuice. After going through all these movies, reading all these essays, watching all these YouTube videos, there's one thing that sticks out to me. The reason that people look back fondly at Beetlejuice is captured in one work of art, this short film from 1989.
Another boring party. This is a job for Beetlejuice!
It's showtime!
Uh-oh. Jake's in trouble. Oh, you're so rude!
Can I be scary or what?
Beetlejuice was a way for kids to annoy their parents. Not to question authority, not to deconstruct power structures, not to satirize.
Talking Beetlejuice. Pull its string and hear 6 random Beetlejuice expressions.
You too can be a true outsider, just like a middle-class white boy living in Burbank in the 1960s. There's a scene from Blue Velvet I didn't really get into earlier. It's a musical number which bears only passing resemblance to the musical number in Beetlejuice. Unlike the characters in Beetlejuice who sing along enthusiastically, Frank Booth, played by Dennis Hopper, quietly mutters along as if hypnotized. Early in the film, we've seen Frank brutalize a woman. We've seen his perverse attitudes towards sex, and yet we see him here identifying with a sweet love song. Frank, a maniac who screams one minute then laughs off his own violent behavior in the next, is Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is the childish, playful Hollywood version. Frank is the version too awful for us to confront. And those replies I got on Twitter about people's thoughts on Beetlejuice, some of them speak to the difference between the cartoon and the movie, that the cartoon was fun and funny, and the movie was a bit much. But most of them don't. Most of them conflate the live-action version with the cartoon version, or maybe they never saw a difference in the first place. And Burton indulges in sentimentalization. He mentioned that he liked the biography they based the Ed Wood screenplay off of, not because of its accuracy, but because it's like someone's memory of a life. It just kinda happens and you try to give it shape. I find that much more realistic in terms of the way I perceive, the way I remember things, the way life is for me. I think Burton's naive take on memory is much more telling than he realizes. Instead of commenting on the way we perceive memories or reality, he indulges in sentimentalization. Instead of remembering Beetlejuice as a terrible person, a selfish, rapey bigot, we'd rather remember him as this.
Can I be scary or what?
Or as a sanitized cartoon version who just loves hijinks and wacky adventures, despite the fact that he was banging a child.
Happy anniversary, Beetlejuice.
Oh boy!
But there are larger consequences to this kind of naive narrative building. Consequences to choosing the way you remember something instead of how it actually happened. Let's check in with our buddy Ronald Reagan and see if he has anything to add.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Do facts and evidence matter? Or is what matters what's in his heart? What if that heart is a cookie manufactured in a factory created by a mad scientist? Instead of characterizing authorities as truly evil, it makes us more comfortable and safe to imagine them as someone with a cookie heart who made a one-time boo-boo.
It was a mistake.
Instead of characterizing society as a violent machine that consumes humanity, we'd prefer that our leaders simply say, let them eat candy.
Jelly bean mosaics started in the 1980s.
Hey!
And were actually inspired by President Ronald Reagan's love for the candy. His obsession motivated San Francisco artist Peter Rocha to create this image, which now hangs in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library.
So all of this is just a very long-winded way of saying most mainstream movies are like regular candy. Sweet, colorful. Tim Burton movies just add a touch of, oh, hello, Edward Scissorhands. So sometimes candy's sour, sometimes it's sweet. You want more for some undefinable reason, but it's just candy. And when you grow up, you realize just eating candy isn't enough. Thanks for watching my first film analysis video, everybody! Tweet at me or comment below to let me know your thoughts. And if you want to see more videos like this, you can support me on Patreon. Here are the names of my wonderful patrons. And you can find the link below, as well as links to articles, videos, and YouTube videos I referenced or found helpful while researching this video. So support these awesome creators. And of course, my butts from Cracked, Small Beans, Gamefully Unemployed, and some more news. Say bye, duck. Bye.